Hey guys, I'm Danny and this is Nurturing Noise. Today we're going to be talking about microphone polar patterns and what's the best scenario to use each one. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about exactly what polar patterns are. When you hear this, people are referring to the microphone's ability to pick up signal. How much of it is it receiving? Are there weak spots in the microphone, areas that are a little bit more powerful or more sensitive? The first polar pattern we're going to be talking about today is called omnidirectional. Now this means that it picks up signal equally from 360 degrees, the full 360. So for example, if this was a 360 degree omnidirectional mic, it could pick up from anywhere. So an omnidirectional mic would work best if you're recording instruments in a studio and you want to go for that open natural sound. The omnidirectional mic is going to be your go-to. The second polar pattern that we're going to be talking about today, and it's actually the most common, is going to be called a cardioid polar pattern. It's perfect for getting a dry signal, which is always what we want when we're recording. And if you look at the diagram, you're going to see that this polar pattern is the most sensitive at 0 degrees, and it is the weakest at 180 degrees. And when I say weakest, I mean null or least sensitive. So at 180 degrees, your microphone is going to have the most difficulty picking up signal, which is going to be the back of your microphone. Whereas the most sensitive it is at 0 degrees, the front of your microphone. Hey guys, if you're liking this video so far, hit that like button, I'd really appreciate it. The third polar pattern that we're going to talk about today is called a supercardioid polar pattern. So supercardioid in a lot of ways looks like the cardioid polar pattern that we just talked about. However, there is a slight difference. It's going to have a more directive sound, and what makes this such a brilliant polar pattern is you mainly get the direct signal from your source, which is always what we want to try to go for first. And the supercardioid allows us to do that. The best time to use a supercardioid polar pattern on a microphone is when you're recording live sound situations. This could be like at a concert or something like that, because it's going to allow us to raise the gain or the volume on, say, the singer's vocal without getting that nasty like feedback, the kind that makes you want to go ah, like that one. So it allows us to bump the volume without, hurting everyone's ears in the audience, which is always good. That's always our job, The fourth polar pattern that we're going to be talking about today is called the figure 8 polar pattern. And obviously it makes sense because if you look at this diagram right here, it looks like a figure 8. So this polar pattern is going to be most sensitive at 0 degrees and 180 degrees. And this polar pattern is least sensitive at 90 degrees and 270 degrees. So a lot of the time people use figure 8 mics or mics that have figure 8 polar patterns in recording situations where you have more than one instrument in the room. The figure 8 allows us to reduce the amount of signal that we pick up from the other instruments in the room. So say I'm right here and I'm singing a vocal, right? And I have a figure 8 on this microphone. And I also have a guitar over here playing in the same room, and then I have a piano over here also playing. The figure 8 is going to allow us, based on placement, it's going to allow us to do our best to cancel out the signal from the guitar and the piano, so that way you can mostly get my vocal, because there are situations where you're unfortunately going to have more than one instrument in the same room, and you got to do your best to try and get a clean signal of just the guitar, just the vocal, or just the piano. So the figure 8 allows us to do that a little easier. It also has the least bass response and is the most sensitive to wind and handling noise. If you guys have any questions so far, please let me know in the comment section. I'm here for you guys. Leave a comment, let me know if you have questions or anything you'd like me to further explain. The last polar pattern that we are talking about today is going to be the hypercardioid polar pattern. Now this one's similar to supercardioid, but the supercardioid is least sensitive at 125 degrees, and the hypercardioid is least sensitive at 109 degrees. So when you look at the two diagrams, they're going to look almost identical, except for the secondary circle. That's where it comes into play. And the hypercardioid is the best for picking up drums like on a stage or isolating a sound source that's a little bit at a distance. That's when you're going to want to use the hypercardioid polar pattern. All right, so we have talked about the 5 most common microphone polar patterns that you might come into contact with. We talked about the omnidirectional, which is sensitive all 360 degrees. Any way you put it, it's sensitive. We talked about the cardioid microphone, which is the most sensitive at 0 degrees, which is the front of your microphone, and the least sensitive at 180 degrees at the back of your microphone. We talked about the supercardioid polar pattern, which is best for recording live sound situations. We talked about the figure 8 polar pattern, which is amazing for isolating a single sound source when you're recording with more than one instrument in the room. And lastly, we talked about the hypercardioid polar pattern. And this one is best for picking up a sound source that is at a distance. For example, a set of drums on a stage where your microphone is a bit at a distance. That's when hypercardioid is going to be your best friend. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope this video cleared up any questions you might have had on polar patterns, or even just bringing up what polar patterns are if you haven't run into them yet. And I have a request for you guys. If you have microphones at home already, go home and check the polar pattern on your microphone if you haven't already, because I guarantee you that's going to answer so many questions you didn't know you had on either why your sound is weird and you can't seem to fix it, or why you have just discovered this amazingly cool sound that you can't explain why it's there. Go home and check your microphone's polar patterns is going to answer a lot of questions for you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for coming to Nurturing Noise, and until next time, keep nurturing your noise.